Between 1986 and 1991, 10 women were murdered in the farming communities surrounding Hwaseong, South Korea. For 33 years, the killer walked free. The families waited, the police logged hundreds of thousands of hours, and the nation's longest cold case remained unsolved. To understand the investigation's failure, you have to look at the country during the mid-1980s. South Korea's economy was booming, pulling vast populations into rapidly expanding cities as the 1988 Olympics approached. But 40 kilometers south of Seoul, Hwaseong remained agricultural. The area was a patchwork of rice paddies and narrow farm roads. Women walked home alone on unlit paths, often miles from the nearest telephone or police station. In September 1986, the murders began. The victims were taken from these isolated paths at night. The killer followed a specific pattern, using the victim's own clothing, such as socks or undergarments, to bind and strangle them. This map shows the geographic cluster of the attacks. Every murder occurred within a 10-kilometer radius. The perpetrator operated within a specific local territory, where he knew the terrain and the lack of surveillance. The geography of Hwaseong provided cover. In the 1980s, there were no CCTV cameras or streetlights along these rural routes. A predator could stalk these paths and disappear into the fields without leaving a witness. The attacks continued through 1987. The killer targeted girls as young as 14 and women as old as 71, suggesting he focused on isolation and opportunity rather than a specific physical type. Panic gripped the province. Women avoided walking alone, and many stopped wearing the color red after it became associated with the crime scenes. While the residents of Gyeonggi Province lived in fear, the rest of the country celebrated the 1988 Seoul Olympics. The national focus shifted to international success, even as the killings in the countryside resumed. The local police were overmatched. At the time, DNA analysis was not used in South Korean criminal investigations. Detectives relied on blood typing, which could narrow a suspect pool to a broad blood group, in this case type B, but could not identify a specific individual. Without the ability to match biological evidence to a single person, investigators were forced to rely on massive manual sweeps. They abandoned forensic precision for sheer manpower, interviewing tens of thousands of men in the surrounding townships. The manhunt became the largest in South Korean history. Police interviewed over 21,000 suspects, yet the killer remained unidentified. Under intense pressure, the investigation turned to coerced testimony, focusing the weight of the state on a single individual. In 1989, a man named Yoon Sung-yeo was arrested for the 8th murder. He later testified that he was tortured by investigators until he signed a confession for a crime he did not commit. Based on that coerced confession, Yoon was convicted in 1994 and sentenced to life in prison. The murder stopped in 1991. The investigation eventually stalled, and in 2006, the statute of limitations for the case expired. Legally, the Hwaseong serial murders were over, and the file was moved to the archives. The 20th century investigation left a double tragedy. 10 families were denied the truth, and an innocent man spent 2 decades in prison for a crime the real killer committed. In 2019, the National Forensic Service began a systematic review of biological evidence from cold cases. They aimed to apply modern DNA sequencing to samples that had been stored since the 1980s. Investigators retrieved preserved evidence from the original crime scenes. The focus shifted from muddy fields to the sterile environment of a modern laboratory. Scientists successfully extracted a DNA profile from a microscopic semen sample. This biological signature had survived 33 years in storage. The profile was run against the national database. Forensic technicians found a perfect match. After 33 years, the DNA analysis identified the man responsible for the Hwaseong killings. The DNA match was Lee Chun-jae. He was 23 years old when the first murder occurred in 1986. Lee had been incarcerated since 1994. He was serving a life sentence at Busan prison for the murder of his sister-in-law, a crime committed 3 years after the Hwaseong murder stopped. When confronted by investigators in prison, Lee confessed to all 10 Hwaseong murders. He provided specific, granular details about the victims and his methods, information that only the perpetrator could have known. The identification confirmed that the killer was not an elusive mastermind, but a local man who had been hiding in plain sight within the prison system for 25 years. Because the statute of limitations had expired in 2006, Lee Chun-jae could not be prosecuted for the Hwaseong victims. He remains in prison for his 1994 conviction, but he will not face a new trial for the killings that haunted the nation. Lee's confession allowed the legal system to address the wrongful conviction of Yoon Sung-yeo. In December 2020, a court officially acquitted Yoon, restoring his name after he had already served 20 years in prison. The Hwaseong case drove systemic change in South Korea. The legislature abolished the statute of limitations for murder and reformed police interrogation practices to prevent future coerced confessions. While the resolution came too late for many, the identification of Lee Chun-jae ended 3 decades of uncertainty. The preservation of the 1986 evidence ensured that even after the legal clock ran out, the truth was eventually established.